So many people don't have any concept of who God is, and many that do believe that there is some kind of God have this counterfeit God mentality. They believe something, but it may not be what is true. There's millions of people that call themselves Christians, and yet they don't believe that God is in control and that he cares about them. In your notes, if you're taking them, what you believe about God affects how you see yourself. What you believe about God affects how you see yourself. And instead of Christians transforming culture around them with the biblical truth, what's happening is the opposite. That people who call themselves followers of Christ are actually getting transformed by the world around them. They're conforming to the world. Scripture says that we should not be conformed to the world, and yet that is what so many people are doing. We're accepting a counterfeit God, accepting something that is not real and genuine. And in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, it says this. It says, in the last days, there will be very difficult times. Has anybody had any difficult times lately? Okay, most of you have had some difficult times. It says, in the last days, there will be very difficult times. As I read this, it's easy to forget that this was written over 2,000 years ago and not like last week. Because as we read through this, it's going to sound like it was written last week. Listen here. In the last days, there will be very difficult times, for people will love themselves and their money. We surely don't see that these days. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing or making fun of God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. We never see any of these things, do we? So they will consider nothing sacred. They will consider nothing sacred. Goes on to say, they will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends and be reckless and be puffed up with pride. And they'll love pleasure rather than loving God. Doesn't this sound like this was just written? This is like describing the world that we live in now. And they're saying this is what it's going to be like in the last days, in the final days before the return of Christ. Loving pleasure rather than loving God. Verse 5 says, they will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Underline that whole sentence there. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. It goes on to say, stay away from people like that. Stay away from people who are, reckless and disobedient and prideful and slander others. People who act religious, but then reject the power that could make them godly. Many people say that they believe in God, but there's this big gap of what that means. If you ask somebody if they believe in God and they say yes, that does not necessarily imply that they believe in the God of Scripture, the God of the Bible. There's a big gap of what that actually means, because so many people these days, they derive their understanding of God from things like pop culture, for example. They turn on the TV and they see how God is represented there, maybe from a movie, perhaps from social media, maybe from the news, maybe from a politician. They see how these people talk about God and demonstrate God, and then they base their view of God off of those things. There's a wide variety of what people consider God. But I believe if we want to live lives as followers of Jesus Christ, that we need to have a clear view of God and who he is. Not something fabricated. We need to understand what Scripture says, what it teaches us about who God is and how he interacts with our world.